Hello everyone. Today we're gonna learn about data collection. By the end of the lesson, students will able to identify and apply the different types of data collection, specifically to describe the types of obtaining data to infer data using probability.
Are you ready? Let's get started.
Hi, I am Janelle B. Ensalada and I am the first reporter of the Group 1. So, ang itatakal natin ngayon is about the obtaining data and the methods of data collection. Okay, so obtaining data. Statistics defined as the science that deals with the collection, organization, presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data in order to draw judgment or conclusions that help in the decision-making process. Okay, so kadalasan din ito is sa mga research. If para matalaman ko nila kung to prove na tama ba ang kanilang studies or mali ba ang kanilang theory, so they need data or statistics, ganun. So sa business din, ginagamit din yan whether to put up a business or not, based on the data na nakukuha nila. Okay, so we have two main divisions of statistics. So first is we have descriptive statistics. So deals with the procedures that organize, summarize, and describe quantitative data. And then the second one is we have inferential statistics. So deals with making a judgment or a conclusion about the population based on the findings from a sample. Okay, so we have here statistical terms. So first is we have population or universe. So this refers to the totality of objects, person, places, things used in a particular study. So ito yung sa isang place, ito yung parang ginagawa mo as respondent sa isang research. So ito yung totality nila. Then we have sample. So any subset of population or few members of a population. So if napakalaki ng population ng ginagawa mong research, so pwede kang kukuha lang yun ng maliit na part lang yun. So tinatawag natin yung sample kasi it is just a portion of the total population. So next is we have data. So are facts, figures, and information collected on some characteristics of the population or sample. So ito naman yung data naman is ito na yung mga nakuha natin na information from the respondents natin. And then we have here is ungrouped or raw data. So our data which is not organized in any specific way. So ito is hindi pa siya na-organize nga from the word itself. And then we have group data, our raw data organized into groups or categorized with corresponding frequencies. So ito naman is yung kabaliktaran ng ungrouped data. So yung sa group data naman is para mas madali mong parang ma-interpret yung datas mo, kailangan organized. Kasi pag naka-group na yung data mo, mas mabilis ka na ma-come up with your own conclusion. Okay, so we have here parameter. So parameter is the descriptive measure of the characteristic of the population. So ito yung nag-describe sa ating population. And then next is we have statistic. It is the measure of characteristic of a sample. So ito naman yung parang nag-describe din siya sa sample natin. And then we have constant, a characteristic or property of a population or sample which is common to all members of the group. So, 'di ba, magkuha ka ng data sa isang population or sample, and then may mga common kasi sa kanila na makukuha mo na data. So, ito yung tinatawag na constant natin. So, ganun. And then we have variable, a measure or characteristic or property of a population or sample that may have a number of different values. So, di ba, iba-iba na yung mga values na makukuha natin sa ating mga pag-data collection natin. Okay, so let's proceed to the methods of data collection. So, first, let's define what is a data collection. So, it is the process of gathering and measuring information on variables of interest in an established systematic fashion. So, ito yung pagkukuha natin ng mga data or mga information from a certain population or sample para makakuha tayo ng ating conclusion or result ng ating ginagawang research or ano pa man yan. So, ganun. So we have here types of data. So first is the primary data. So primary data are the data which are collected fresh and for the first time. So karaniwan nito is ito yung mga tao mismo na nakakita or nakasaksi na mismo ng event or ang isang pangyayari, ganun. So, they are considered as primary data. Okay, and the second one is the secondary data. So, data which have been collected by someone else and which have already been passed through the statistical process. So, ang advantage nito is hindi mo na kailangan pang pumunta doon para mag-gather ng data kasi for example, same naman kayo ng research, so pwede mo na gamitin yung data ng iba, so na nagawa ng ibang researcher para yun yung maging basis mo. So less na effort, na less yung hindi siya costly kasi mag-ano ka lang sa researcher, mag-ask ka lang doon. And then, but the thing is, ang disadvantage naman nito is pwedeng out of date na yung pag-gather niya ng data kasi it could be it was 10 years ago. So, 'di ba, after 10 years may mga changes na yan sa isang society or sa isang sa population. So, yun. So, pwedeng hindi na magiging relevant yun. So, ganun yung secondary data. Okay, so let's proceed to the primary data. So, dito naman tayo sa mga iba't ibang methods ng primary data. So, the first one is observation. So, a method of which under data from the field is collected with the help of observation. So, from the word itself, so through observe. So, pag-observe ng isang event or isang population. Then, we have here is the types of observation. So, the first one is the structured and unstructured. So, structured observation done by characterizing style of recording the observed information or standard conditions or of observation. So, it could be in a form of video, photos, or recordings, ganun. And then we have unstructured observation so this is done without any thought before observation. So, ito naman is wala kang parang primary good na parang expectation before ka magpunta sa isang place na i-observe mo or tawag nun place na i-observe mo. So yung structured naman is parang meron ka ng baga expectation kasi meron ka ng thought nga ay ganito daw yung lugar, ganyan. Although hindi mo pa nakita, pero meron ka nang nasa isip mo na parang mga ina-expect mo na makita dun. Okay, so the next one is we have participant and non-participant. So, participant, when the observer is a member of the group which he is observing, and then we have non-participant, when observer is observing people without giving any information to them. So, may pagkakaiba rin kasi yan na pag kasali ka sa isang grupo, then nag-observe ka, may mga data ka na doon mo lang makukuha kasi member ka. Then may mga data naman din na parang hindi good makukuha if you are a member of that a group, na mas maintindihan mo siya if you are not a member, you're just an observer, ganun. And then the third one is we have controlled and uncontrolled. So controlled, when the observation takes place in a natural condition. So yun yung parang kung paano yung gina-expect nila na condition ng isang place. And then the next one is uncontrolled, when observation takes place according to definite prearranged plan. So ito yung mga hindi nakaplano, so kaya nga siya uncontrolled. And then so we have the second method, as we have the interview method. So involves presentation or oral verbal stimuli and reply in terms of oral verbal responses. So yun, interviews. And then we have different types of interviews. So the first one is the personal interviews. So the interviewer asks question generally in a face-to-face contact to the other person or person. So ito yung parang very common na nakikita natin, yung parang it could be one-on-one or 1, 2, 3 ganun, para may interviewer, and then yung mga interviewees naman niya, parang ginagawa natin, makikita natin yun ngayon sa mga presidential interviews, ganun, may mga personal interview, ganun. And then we have structured interviews. So in this case, a set of pre-decided questions are there. So parang binibigay na good mismo before yung questions. So para yung gagawin lang nila is i-record ba nila or ganun, i-take down na lang nila yung mga questions kasi nabasa na mismo ng mga gipang interview kung ano yung mga questions na ibabato sa kanila. And then we have unstructured interviews. So in this case, we don't follow a system of predetermined questions. So ito naman yung parang kabaligtaran ng structured interview. Okay, so the fourth one is we have focus interview. So attention is focused on the given experience of the respondent and its possible effects. So example nito is, for example, naka-join siya ng palarong pambansa, ganun. So athlete daw siya. And then ang interview niya is about sa experience niya doon, kung ano. So parang naka-focus yung interview niya sa pag-join niya doon. So hindi sa kung ano, hindi about sa background niya, hindi about kundi so ano yung mga experiences niya doon sa isang event. So ganun. And then we have clinical interviews. So concerned with broad underlying feelings or motivations or with the course of individual's life experience. So rather than the effects of the specific experience, as in the case of focus interviews. Okay, so dito naman is ito yung karaniwang ginagawa good sa doctor-patient interview. So 'di ba yung doctor is in-interview niya yung patient kung ano yung mga iniinom niya, ano yung mga past experience niya siguro na it may affect sa condition niya ngayon. So ganun. And then we have group interviews. So a group of 6 to 8 individuals is interviewed. So ayun, so parang ano lang, grupo sila na i-interview. And then we have the seventh one is qualitative and quantitative interviews. So divided on the basis of subject. So subject matter. So it could be whether qualitative or quantitative. Karaniwang ginagamit ito sa mga researches. Individual interviews. So interviewer meets a single person and interviews him. So from the word itself, individual, parang one-on-one interview to. So ganun. Okay, so we have selection interviews. So done for the selection of people for a certain job. So ito yung example nito is job interviews. So 'di ba pinipili ng it could be ng manager kung sino yung pinaka qualified na person na para sa isang certain job. So ganun. And then we have depth interviews. So it deliberately aims to elicit unconscious as well as other types of material relating especially to personality, dynamics, and motivations. So ito naman is yung parang siguro may mga primary interviews na gusto nilang maging go deeper or beyond the surface of that, na parang mas detailed yung mga sagot na ng interviewer. So kadalasan ginagawa dito is may mga follow-up questions. So yung mga ba't mo naman yung ginawa, or ba't mo naman di ginawa, ganun. So mga ganun na bagay. So para maging deeper yung sagot ng gi-interview. And then we have telephonic interviews. So contacting samples on the telephone. So ito yun, so parang through telephone, or ngayon parang madami naman kasing social media, so pwede ng video calls, ganun, or any means of communication. And then so the third one of methods is we have the questionnaire method. So this method of data collection is quite popular, particularly in case of big inquiries. So the questionnaire is mailed to respondents who are expected to read and understand the questions and write down the reply in the space meant for the purpose of the questionnaire itself. Okay, so ito naman is this is very effective if napakarami ng yung population. Kasi naman kapag i-interview mo naman isa-isa sila, napakahirap na. So ito naman is magbibigay ka lang ng questionnaire, and then for that, then if nasagutan na nila, then i-collect mo lang yung mga answers nila, and then so you have the datas na. Okay, so the next one is the case study method. So it's essentially an intensive investigation of a particular unit under consideration. So it is a learning technique in which the student is faced in a particular problem. So this is the case, and then in general terms, the case study analyzes a defined problem, so consisting in real life solution, and uses real information as the methodological tool. And then the next one is the survey method. So it's one of the common methods of diagnosing and solving a social problem is that of undertaking surveys. Okay, so ito naman is parang para malaman gud nila kung ano yung gusto ng mga tao, kung anong 'di ba? For example, ngayon, we have 'di ba, parating na ang election, so gusto nila malaman kung sino yung mga parang gusto nila, yung parang tawag nila, kung parang so through survey malalaman natin kung sino yung parang malakas good sa mga tao, ganun. And then if maano na nila kung ano yung gusto ng mga tao, and then makakaroon na sila ng kanilang parang findings na ito ang dapat yung gawin, ito yung mga hindi dapat gawin kasi ayaw ng tao, gusto ng tao, ganun. Okay, so let's proceed naman sa secondary data kasi tapos na tayo sa primary data. So first one is we have the sources of data. So it could be publications of central, state, local government, technical and trade journals, and then we have books, magazines, newspaper, reports, and publications of industry. So ito yung mga examples ng mga secondary data, mga sources. And then let's proceed to the factors to be considered before using secondary data. So the first one is the reliability of data. So who, when, which method, at what time, etc. So dapat i-consider mo din before using secondary data is if connected ba yun sa mga data na gusto mong kunin, or sa research mo yung mga ano doon, yung parang yung about sa tawag nun, sa population, about sa places, about sa time, date, ganun. If ano ba, reliable ba siya. And then so the next one is we have suitability of data. So we have object, scope, and nature of original inquiry should be studied as if the study was with different objective. So yun. So parang ang ano mo dito is suitable ba yung ginamit mo na data for your own research, ganun. And then we have adequacy of data. So the level of accuracy. So may mga research kasi na kinonduct before na hindi accurate kasi it could be mali yung methods niya ng pagkuha ng data, ganun. And then we have area differences, then data is not adequate for study. So ito yun, yung for example, although same yung gusto nyong kunin na data na example poverty rate ng isang lugar, pero yung ginamit mo na na secondary na data is yung mga data from a parang urbanized or medyo urbanized na place. And then yung sa ano mo din sa research mo is yung parang medyo hindi siya urbanized. So parang magkaiba yung area. So pag ganun kasi, it could be magkakaiba yung makukuha mo talaga na data at yung data na ginawa mong business. And then we have the selection of proper method for collection of data. So first one is nature, scope, and object of inquiry, and then the availability of funds, then time factor, and then precision required. So ano lang, simple advice, di ba, you already conduct research naman way back senior high school and junior high school. Yung commonly na ginagamit kasi ng mga ano is yung survey method and tsaka yung interview method. So mas prefer ko yung interview method kasi dun kasi mas reliable yung mga answers nila. Kasi pag interview mo sila, ma-question mo talaga, and then if you have parang tawag nun, meron ka pang mga questions na hindi mo nalagay sa list mo, pwede mo pang matanong kasi in-interview naman sila. Kasi pag nasa survey, may tendency kasi na yung iba kasi na respondents talagang mga tamad na check lang ganun. So parang hindi na accurate yung makukuha mo ng data kasi yung respondent mo mismo hindi nila sineseryoso yung pag-collect mo ng data. So yun, kaya lang medyo mas ma-effort talaga yung interview method. So yun, hopefully may natutunan kayo about data collection. So thank you.
Every time we find answers to our queries or to our research problem, we do collect data, such as surveys, which will enable us to collect data that are necessary for us to gather answers to the questions and problems we made. Before we start doing our data collection, we always have to make a plan to be guided along the way. The problems always come along with it. With proper planning and detailed process of doing the data collection, the data collection could be highly successful. So today, I will be tackling about planning and conducting surveys. The success of data collection requires careful preparation. The first and often the most difficult question is why I am doing this survey. Many studies start with a general hope that something interesting will emerge, and they often end to frustration. The general interest has first to be translated into precisely formulated written objectives. Every survey should be reasonably sure to give an adequate answer to at least one specific question. Surveys can take different forms. They can be used to ask only one question, or they can ask a series of questions. We can use surveys to test out people's opinion or to test a hypothesis. So we have also the advantages and disadvantages of surveys. So some advantages of surveys are that they are efficient ways of collecting information from a large number of people. They are also relatively easy to administer. A wide variety of information can be collected and they can be focused such that researchers can stick to just one question that interests them. So the disadvantages or the cons of surveys arise from the fact that they depend on the subject's motivation, honesty, memory, and ability to respond. So the disadvantage of this is that when we do surveys, the respondents' answer will always be based on their motivation and their opinion. And we are not clear if they are honest or not, and there is also a limit in their answer as much as how they remember the facts that they have been through. So before we can conduct our survey, then we have to design our survey. So these are the steps that are useful in designing a survey. So first is to determine the goal of our survey. This part will focus to the question you want to answer. For example, my problem is that I want to know the lived experiences of slum dwellers towards environmental health condition. So my question will be, what are the lived experiences of slum dwellers toward environmental health condition? So this is the question I want to have an answer with. So this is the goal of my survey, to get the answer of this question. So the next step is to identify the sample population. In this part, you will have to identify who are you going to interview or who are you going to conduct your survey. In here, we have to determine the population of the population interest of our goal or our question. So going back to our question, our goal are the lived experiences of slum dwellers towards environmental health condition. So from the question itself, the sample population or the target respondent of the survey is slum dwellers. So the next step is choose an interviewing method. So there are many types of interviewing method. We have the face-to-face interview, phone interview, self-administered paper survey, or internet survey, and many more. So these are some types of survey methods. So in choosing the right method, it depends on your objective, timeline, budget, and sample. There are two broad categories of survey methods. We have the qualitative and quantitative. So the type of survey method or the interview we are going to use depending if it is qualitative or quantitative. One is face-to-face surveys. So face-to-face surveys require little effort of the part of the respondents as the interviewer meets them at a pre-arranged time and location. The interviewer works directly with the respondents while filling the survey and clarify their doubts. Next survey method is the focus group. So, like the face-to-face survey, the focus group survey method is in person. The only difference is that there is a group of people around 6 to 10. So in the face-to-face, you are only going to interview one person at a time. So in focus group, they are by group. So the group is selected to represent the survey's target population. Each person can share their feedback on a topic, while a moderator leads the group. Their role is to control the flow of discussion and reduce bias. So number 3 or the third method is the online survey method. So online surveys are one of the most popular types of survey methods for good reason. First is that they are accessible, economical, and easy to share. Second is that they are fast. You can get the responses within hours, if not minutes. If their respondents are responsive, then you can get the responses within a minute. And third is that they come with extra features such as templates, images, skip logic, compulsory questions, or a minimal character count. Example of these are like using the Google Docs. So the fourth method is panel sampling. So panel sampling is when you choose people randomly from a target audience to be a part of a panel. This panel is then part of the study that requires them to take recurring surveys over a period. Fifth method is phone survey. So almost everyone has a phone at home. That's why phone surveys are incredibly convenient. It also allows anonymity in case of sensitive questions. If the interviewer is skillful, it can also lend a personal touch which helps build a relationship. So this survey is using a phone or a cell phone. The next step is to decide what questions you will ask and in what order and how to phrase them. So before designing a questionnaire, make a list of all relevant topics that you want to cover and obtain information about. Make sure to include everything you need to answer in your research question. You should take this phase seriously because once data collection begins, you will not be able to change your questionnaire. The last step is to analyze the result by making graphs and drawing conclusions. After you conducted the interview and collect the information, so the next topic is the sampling techniques. So we have two types of sampling technique. We have the non-probability sampling and the probability sampling. So under non-probability sampling, we have three common types, which are the convenience sampling, purposive sampling, and the quota sampling. So what is non-probability sampling? It is also called the judgment or the subjective sampling, which is a method that is convenient and economical, but the inferences made based on the findings are not so reliable. This type of sample is easier and cheaper to access, but it has a higher risk of sampling bias. That means that the inferences you can make about the population are weaker than with the probability samples, and your conclusion may be more limited. That is convenience sampling. A convenience sample simply includes the individuals who happen to be most accessible to the researcher. The researcher uses a device in obtaining the information from the respondents which favors the researcher but can cause bias to the respondents. Example, you are researching opinions about the student support services in your university. So after each of your classes, you are asked your fellow students to complete a survey on a topic. This is a convenient way to gather data. But as you only surveyed students taking the same classes as you at the same level, the sample is not a representative of all the students at your university. So this is the convenience sampling. So next is purposive sampling. In this method, the selection of respondent is predetermined according to the characteristic of interest made by the researcher. It is often used in a qualitative research where the researchers want to gain detailed knowledge about a specific phenomenon rather than make statistical inferences, or where the population is very small and specific. So example of this is that you want to know more about the opinions and experiences of disabled students at your university. So you purposely select a number of students with different support needs in order to gather a varied range of data on their experiences with the student services. So the third one is the quota sampling. So quota sampling is defined as a non-probability sampling method in which researchers create a sample involving individuals that represent a population. Researchers choose these individuals according to specific traits or quality. They decide and create quotas so that the market research samples can be useful in collecting data. These samples can be generalized to the entire population. Then the final subset will be decided only according to the interviewers or the researcher's knowledge of population. So we have two types of quota sampling, which are the proportional quota sampling and the non-proportional quota sampling. So proportional quota sampling is the major characteristic of the population by sampling a proportional amount of each is representative. Next is that non-proportional quota sampling is a bit less restrictive. In this method, a minimum number of sampled units in each category is specified and not concerned with having numbers that match the proportion in a population. This is an example of a quota sampling. So a researcher wants to survey individuals about what smartphone brand they prefer to use. So the researcher considers a sample size of 500 respondents. So these are the ways that the researcher can divide the population by quotas. If the researcher wants to survey based on gender, then the researcher can divide the 500 respondents by 250 males and 250 females. So this type of quota sampling is a proportional quota sampling since there is a proportional number of males and females. And if it is by age, then for example, it is by age, then the researcher can get 100 respondents in each age between 16 to 20, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, and 51 up. So this is also a proportional quota sampling. So example in if the researcher consider a respondent depending on their employment status, then for example, the researcher will get 350 employed and 150 unemployed people. So this sample falls under a non-proportional data sampling since the number of respondents based on the characteristic is not proportional. So this is the quota sampling. So next is the probability sampling. So the probability sampling, every member of the population is given an equal chance to be selected as a part of the sample. So we're going to talk about three techniques of a probability sampling, which are simple random sampling, stratified sampling, and cluster sampling. So what is simple random sampling? It is a basic sampling technique where a group of subject or a sample is selected for study from a larger group or a population. So example is that you want to select simple random sample of 100 employees of a company. So you assign a number to every employee in that company with a database from 1 to 1000 and use a random number generator to select 100 numbers, or you have to go and pick until you get 100 numbers. Then next is that they stratified sampling. So there are many often be factors which you can divide up a population into subpopulation, and the measurement of interest may vary among the different subpopulation. To use this sampling method, you divide the population into subgroup, which is called strata, based on the relevant characteristic. Example are gender, age range, or income bracket, and job role. Based on the overall proportion of the population, you calculate how many people should be sampled from each subgroup. Then you use random or systematic sampling to select a sample from each subgroup. So example is that the company has 800 female employees and 200 male employees. You want to ensure that the sample reflects the gender balance of the company. So you sort the population into two strata based on gender. Then you use random sampling on each group, where you can select by selecting, you are selecting 80 women and 20 men, which gives you a representative sample of 100 people. So next is, and last one, is the cluster sampling. So a cluster sampling is a technique where the entire population is divided into groups or clusters, and the random sample of these clusters are selected. Instead of sampling individual from each subgroup, you randomly select entire subgroups. If it is practically possible, you must include every individual from each sample cluster. If the cluster themselves are large, you can also sample individuals from within each cluster using one of the techniques. Example of this is the company has offices in 10 cities across the country, all with roughly the same number of employees in similar roles. For example, you don't have the capacity to travel to every office to collect your data, so you use random sampling to select 3 offices. So that 3 offices is what we call cluster. So this is cluster sampling.
Planning and conducting experiment. Introduction to design of experiment. Experiment. It is a systematic procedure carried out under controlled condition to determine known or unknown effect, to test or establish a hypothesis. There are 3 bases on conducting an experiment. First, we have researcher is trying to learn something new. With an experiment, the researcher is trying to learn something new about the world, an explanation of why something happens. Second, validity. Being mindful from the start about factors that can influence each aspect of your experiment can make a high validity, both internal and external, that can lead to a strong conclusion and successful result to the experiment. If you cannot maintain your internal and external validity, then you will be expecting a useless result. Third, follow all the steps of the scientific method. When designing an experiment, a researcher must follow all the steps of the scientific method, from making sure that the hypothesis is valid and testable to using control and statistical tests. There are 5 stages to be carried out for the design of experiments. First is planning. It is important to carefully plan for the course of experimentation before embarking upon the process of testing and data collection. At this stage, identification of the objects of conducting the experiment or investigation, assessment of time, and available resources to achieve the objectives. The importance of planning is to set the experimentation goals for what you have to achieve at the end of the experiment. The second stage is screening. Screening experiments are used to identify the important factors that affect the process under investigation out of the large pool of potential factors. Screening process eliminates unimportant factors and attention is focused on the key factors. The usual goal of screening is to identify the most important factors that affect the process quality. The third stage is optimization. After narrowing down the important factors affecting the process, then determine the best setting of these factors to achieve the objectives of the investigation. The objectives may be either increase yield or decrease variability, or to find setting that achieve both at the same time depending on the product or process under investigation. The fourth stage is robustness testing. Once the optimal settings of the factors have been determined, it is important to make the product or process insensitive to variations resulting from changes in factors that affect the process but are beyond the control of the analyst. Such factors are referred to as noise or uncontrollable factors that are likely to be experienced in the application environment. Fifth is verification. This final stage involves validation of the optimum settings by conducting a few follow-up experimental runs. This is to confirm that the process functions are expected and all objectives are achieved. So we will remember that a well-built experiment can save not only project time but also solve critical problems which have remained unseen in the processes, and researchers will learn what factors of matter and what factors do not.
This time, let's talk about the probability. Probability is how likely an event to happen. The probability of an event is a number po between 0 and 1, which roughly speaking that when it is 0, it describe about the impossibility. Then when it comes to 1 naman po, it describe about the certainty. So in simple word po, ang probability is a chance of event occurring, no? Kung ilan po ang chance niya sa puso mo, parang ganon. So we have this formula that probability is equal po the number of ways achieving the success over the total number of possible outcomes. So ano po ang good example nito? For example po, mag-flip po tayo ng single coin. So we know that may dalawa talaga tayong possible outcome, which head and the tail. So for example, pag toss po natin ng isa is head po yung lumabas. So meaning to say, meron po tayong 1/2 or 1/2 na probability. Okay, so the probability of something which is certain, kagaya ng sinabi ko kanina, so yun po ay number 1. Pero pag sinabi naman natin yung 0, so it talks about the impossibility. So wala talagang mangyayari, no? So the probability of something not happening is 1 minus the probability that it will happen. So, ayun, ngayon naman, mag-a-unlock po tayo ng mga terms, mga terminology na magagamit po, which is the experiment, event, and simple event. So, unahin po natin yung experiment. So, when talking about experiment po, no, it describes any process that generates a set of data. No, for example, babalikan po natin yung mga ginagawa natin ng sa mga laboratories natin. So, we are having an experiment. Kumbaga, meron po dong process, okay? So, when talking about event naman po, it consists of set of possible outcomes doon po sa ginawa po nating experiment. That can be one or more outcome. For example po, we're having tossing a coin or rolling a dice, di ba? May mga possible po tayong mga outcome depende po doon sa mga space po natin, sample space. No, simple event, so from the word po itself, simple, meaning to say with one outcome. Okay? Now, let's proceed po sa sample space and relationship among events. So, ayun, relationship, no? Ayun, sample space, okay, nauutal ako, is the set of all possible outcome. So, ayun, space, from the word itself, space, no? Anything from this space, no? Yan po sinasabi po natin ng mga possible outcomes. Like, for example po, meron po tayong space na sample ng mga tao. For example, sa certain barangay, so pupuntahin natin ilan yung may mga edad na 17 pataas, ilan yung female, ilan yung male, ganun po. And this can be illustrated po via Venn diagram. Kasi Venn diagram po, kumbaga meron po tayo yung mga bagay na hindi sila in common, meron din yung mga bagay na common sila. Okay, so ito po ay a good example po nito is rolling a dice. So we all know that meron po tayong mga sa set ng mga number set, no, doon sa dice. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like for example, ang mga lumabas po ng mga numbers are 1, 3, and 5. So meaning to say, yun po ang tinatawag natin na odd numbers. So yun po, mga set ng odd numbers. So same through with tossing a coin, yung dalawang coin. So possible po yan, mismo dalawang heads talaga lalabas, or head and tail, or both tail talaga, or tail head, ganun po. So yun, kumbaga ang sample space po natin doon is syempre sa dice, yung mga numbers from 1 to 6. Then for the coin naman is yung 2 heads and 2 tails. Okay. Now, ano po yung difference between sample space and events? So, let's discuss this. So, you all know, na-discuss na po natin when it comes to sample space, yun po yung mga set of possible outcomes. Okay? No? So, we have this, for example, magkakaroon tayo ng experiment, then may mga lalabas po ng mga event. Yun yung mga tinatawag na po natin na a subset on the sample space. So, for example po, magkakaroon po tayong tatlo po nating pagtutos ng coin, tatlong bagsakan ng coin, no? So, kung itutos po natin yan, may mga combination po tayong makukuha. So, possible po na puro heads, tatlo talagang puro heads, pwede din dalawang heads sa tail, pwede ding head, tail, heads, pwede ding tail, head, head, or tail, tail, head, tail, head, tail, or head, tail, tail, or puro talaga tail, ganon. So, yun po yung mga possible outcomes natin. So, may mga, yun po yung yun na po yung sasabihin natin ngayon ng mga sample space natin, no, given by the set na yun. So for example, so alam po natin that sample space pwede po i-represent po natin by a big letter S. So magkakaroon po tayo yun yung mga binanggit ko kanina, that head, heads, head, head, tail, head, so on and so forth. So now suppose po, sasabihin lang po natin, hinahanap lang po natin yung mga outcome na mayroong dalawang heads. So yun po, maglalabas na po dito yung head, head, tail, head, or tail, head. So can be represented by the big letter E, meaning to say a subset, no? A subset doon sa ating sample space. Okay. So ayun. So we can understand this po by also considering rolling a dice. So for example, may sample space po tayo na 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, alam natin pag rolling the dice, yun po, yung 6 po ng mga numbers ang lalabas ng mga sample space natin. When, for example, ang hinahanap lang po are numbers who are odd. So meaning to say, we have 1, 3, 5. And then, for example, even numbers. So 2, 4, and 6. So we have now, if 1, 3, 5, no, the set of 1, 3, yung 1, 3, 5 po natin, yung mga odd, yun po ng 2, 4, 6 na even. So therefore, maglalabas na po yung S. Ano yung S? Yun po yung sample space natin, which is the numbers from 1 to 6. Okay. Now, let's talk about ngayon sa null space. Ano po ba yung null space? From the word itself, null, meaning to say empty, no, is a subset of the sample space po that contains no element and denoted by yung circle at saka may kudlit po siya sa gitna. Meaning to say empty, kulang, wala, no? Kumbaga, no? Ang hirap naman ng taong may null, parang null space, no? Yung pusong wala nagmamahal. Hindi man sa wala nagmamahal, like, parang feeling lang nila that very empty yung puso nila. Kaya empty, kaya sawag siya dito na empty space, null space. Ayun. Okay, pero I do believe wala naman taong null kasi lahat naman tayo are loved, cared, ganon. So, meron naman po tayo dito operations with events. So, ano po yung number 1? We have this intersection of events. So, from the word itself, intersect, ganon, no? Meaning to say that the intersection of two events, for example, meron tayong set of A, set of B, no, denoted by that symbol, ganon. Okay. A intersect B. Okay, isipin nyo na lang parang ganon. No, it is an event containing all the elements that are common. Common. Oh, ano yung common sa'yo at saka ng boyfriend mo? Common sa'yo at saka sa mama at papa mo. So, pwede natin siyang ma-illustrate. For example po, meron tayong mga numbers from sa A po natin, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. And for the letter, sa B naman po, we have 1, 3, 5, 8, 12, 15, 17. So, ano po yung common sa kanila? Which are the numbers 3, 12, 15. Kaya tinawag po natin siya na A intersect B. So, ito po, hindi na po itong bago sa inyo kasi grade 7 pa lang na-discuss na po ito sa atin, no? Yung talking about sets kung nakinig lang po kayo that time. So, ayun, yun po yung kumbaga in real life situation, ano yung common sa inyo? Ano yung may common ground kayo? Ano yung kumbaga meron kayo in common? Pareho ba kayong maitim ang buko? No? Ganon. Pula ang mata? Ay, may pula bang mata? So, brown na mata, ganon. Ayun. So, same ba kayo ng edad? Ganon po. Kumbaga, ano yung common po sa inyo? Okay? So, in mutually exclusive events, from the word sa mutual, pero sinabi naman dito exclusive, meaning to say that if they have no elements in common. So, kabaliktaran po yung diniscuss natin kanina, wala kayo in common. Kumbaga, siya masayahin, ikaw malungkutin, di ba? Paano kayo magkakaroon nun ng tinatawag natin na common ground if wala talaga? Kaya yung sasabi natin na elements that not in common, both of the for example, on the A and B, for example, ikaw at saka yung friend mo, ganun. So, union of events naman po, talking about union of events, from the words of union, no? Pinagkaisa, no? The union of events is the event containing all the elements, for example, belong from the A and B. Now, denoted by the symbol, ganon, U. Simple, ganon lang po. So, the element A union B, no? Ayun, is that, for example, mayroon po tayong letters na A, I, I, O, O. And then for the B is B, C, D, E, F. So, alam natin, pag pinagsama po natin yan, ayun po, A, B, C, D, E, F, I, O, and U. Okay, so, ayun po, union of events, pinagsama, no? For example, pinagsamang puwersa ng section ng civil engineering, section A and B or C and B, ganon, no? Pinagsama. So, yun lang po. Very, very simple. Union of events. So, complement of an event, no? Complement. No? Event is respect to S, no? For example, ang A is with respect to S. The set of all elements such that S are not in A. So, denoted po yan as A prime. So, meaning to say that ano po yung wala sa'yo na meron sa kanya. Ganon. So, sample space po is, for example, S po natin is dog, cow, bird, snake, and pig. So, for example, yun yung mga pet mo. Tapos, yung pet naman ng friend mo is a dog, bird, and pig. So, denoted by A, for example, ikaw yun, A prime, ano yung wala sa'yo na meron sa kanya? So, cow and snake. Ayun, no, parang mahirap din sa atin kasi pilit nating hinahanap yung mga bagay na wala sa atin na meron sa kanya. For example, nito, snake, di ba? Mag-aalaga ka ng snake kasi meron siyang snake, ganun, hinahanap natin. So, yung tawag natin na complement, no? Okay. Yung mga bagay na wala sa kanya, no? Ay, mga bagay na wala sa'yo na meron sa kanya, yun yung ililist po natin ng mga set. Okay, so without further ado, so next topic po natin is the probability of an event will be discussed by our next reporter.
Hi guys, I'm Carl Angelo Ortiz and today I'm gonna report about probability. So first of all, what is probability? Probability is the likelihood or chance of an event occurring. So, probability of an event is equal to number of elements in sample space of an experiment divided by the number of elements in the event set. So, PE is equal to NE divided by NS, where NS represents number of elements in a sample space of an experiment, and E represents the number of elements in the event set, and PE represents the probability of an event. Note, when probabilities are assigned to the outcomes in a sample space, each probability must lie between 0 and 1 inclusive, and the sum of all probabilities assigned must be equal to 1. Therefore, 0 is less than or equal to PE is less than or equal to 1, and PS is equal to 1. Now let us try to understand this with the help of an example. If a die is tossed, the sample space is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. In this set, we have a number of elements equal to 6. Now, if the event is the set of odd numbers in a dice, then we have 1, 3, and 5 as an event. In this set, we have 3 elements. So the probability of getting odd numbers in a single throw of dice is given by probability is equal to 3 over 6, which is equal to 1/2. Now let's proceed to the counting rules useful in probability. So the first rule is multiplicative rule. Now you suppose you have j sets of elements, n sub 1 in the first set, n sub 2 in the second set, until you reach n sub j, or number of sets you're gonna have in the jth set. Suppose you wish to form a sample of j elements by taking one element from each of the j sets. So the number of possible sets is then defined by n sub 1 multiplied by n sub 2, and so on until you reach n sub j. So I have here an example about the multiplicative rule. So, example, a bag contains 6 black marbles and 4 blue marbles. 2 marbles are drawn from the bag without replacement. What is the probability that both marbles are blue? So we have here 2 attempts, so we're gonna separate draw number 1 and draw number 2. So first, you have to figure out the probability of your attempt number 1, which is you're about to draw a blue marble. So the probability of you getting a blue marble in the first attempt is 4 out of 10. 4 because there are 4 blue marbles in the bag, and 10 because there are 10 total marbles available in the bag. So for your second attempt, you need to draw another blue marble. So the probability of you getting a blue marble in your second attempt is 3 over 9, because there are only 3 blue marbles left in the bag, and 9 because you have 9 available marbles in the bag. So for solving the probability of both marbles that are blue, you will multiply your attempt 1 and attempt 2. The probability of attempt 1 and attempt 2, which is 4 over 10 times 3 over 9. So the probability that both marbles are blue is 2 over 15. So that's it for the multiplicative rule. Now we have here the second rule, which is the permutation rule. The arrangement of elements in a distinct order is called permutation. Given a single set of n distinctively different elements, you wish to select k elements from the n and arrange them within k positions. The number of different permutations of the n elements taken k at a time is denoted p sub k raised to n, and is equal to p sub k raised to n is equal to the factorial of n divided by n minus k factorial, which is n represents the total number of objects and k represents the number of objects selected. So I have here an example about the permutation rule. So consider the scenario that you have 50 balls and let an experiment be that 5 balls are randomly selected. So you're gonna do, for the first ball you have 50 options, and for the next we have 49 ways, and the next we have 48 ways to choose a ball, and so on. From the fundamental rule of counting, it should be 50 times 49 times 48 times 47 and 46, which is 50 permutates 5. Because you only have 5 balls to choose, so you're gonna stop at 46. So you're gonna use the formula, which is p sub k raised to n is equal to n factorial divided by n minus k. So n stands for the total number of objects, which is 50 factorial divided by 50 minus 5 factorial. Yeah, that's it. So we have here the third rule, which is the partitions rule. Suppose a single set of n distinctively different elements exist. You wish to partition them into k sets. with the first set containing n sub 1 elements, the second containing n sub 2 elements, and so on, until you reach n sub k elements. The number of different partitions is n factorial divided by n sub 1 factorial, n sub 2 factorial, and so on, n sub k factorial, where n sub 1 plus n sub 2 plus so on plus n sub k is equal to n. Note that the numerator gives the permutations of the n elements. The terms in the denominator remove the duplicates due to the same assignments in the k-sets, multinomial coefficients. So I have here an example about the partition rule. So I have 3 bags that each contain 100 marbles. Bag 1 has 75 red and 25 blue marbles. Bag 2 has 60 red and 40 blue marbles, and in bag 3 has 45 red and 55 blue marbles. I chose one of the bags at random and then pick a marble from the chosen bag, also at random. What is the probability that the chosen marble is red? So for the solution, let R be the event that the chosen marble is red. Let B sub I be the event that I chose bag I. We already know that in the probability of getting red in bag number 1 is 0.75, and probability of getting red in bag number 2 is 0.60, and the probability of getting red in bag number 3 is 0.45. So we choose our partition as B1, B sub 2, B3. Note that this is a valid partition because firstly that BI's are disjoint. Only one of them can happen. And secondly, because their union is the entire sample space, as one of the bags will be chosen for sure. Because the probability of B1 is union to B2, which is union to B3, is equal to 1. Using the law of total probability, we can write the probability of red is equal to the probability of red in bag 1 multiply the probability in bag 1 plus the probability of getting red in bag 2 multiply the probability in bag 2 plus the probability of getting red in bag 3 multiply by the probability of in bag 3, which is equal to 0.75 times 1/3 plus 0.60 times 1/3 plus 0.45 times 1/3 is equal to 0.60, which is the probability of getting a red marble in a certain chosen bag. So that's it for the example in our partition rule. Now for the last rule, which is the combinations rule. A sample of k elements is to be chosen from a set of n elements. The number of different samples of k samples that can be selected from n is equal to n over k is equal to n factorial divided by k factorial multiplied by n minus k factorial. So I have here an example about the last rule, which is the combination rule. So the classic example of probability using combinations is a lottery, where machines randomly choose balls with numbers from a pool of balls. The order of the numbers does not matter. You just need to match the numbers because each ball can be drawn only once. It is without repetition. So like example for in Super Lotto 649, like that, you only need to choose 6 numbers out of 49 numbers in the machine. You don't need to have it in order. You just need to randomly get the 6 numbers in order for you to win. So here's a tip about permutation and combination. In permutation, order matters, while in combination, order doesn't matter. If the certain event has a number and it needs to be in order, you're gonna use permutation. If it doesn't need it in order, you're gonna use combination. So that's it. Thank you.
Greetings, I am Atalia Facey Enriquez, and I would be discussing the last topic, which is the rules of probability. Before discussing, we state the following definition. First definition, 2 events are mutually exclusive or disjoint if they cannot occur at the same time. The second is the probability that event A occurs, given that event B has occurred, is called a conditional probability. This conditional probability of event A given event B is denoted by this symbol. The complement of an event is the event not occurring. The probability that event will not occur is denoted by P of A prime. The probability that event A and B both occur is probability of the intersection of A and B. The probability of the intersections of event A and B is denoted by P of A intersection B, which intersection symbol is the upside down of U. If events A and B are mutually exclusive, P of A intersection B is equal to 0. Next definition, the probability that events A or B occur is the probability of the union of A and B. The probability of the union of events A and B is denoted by P of A union B, where the symbol of union is U. Next definition, if the occurrence of event A changes the probability of event B, then events A and B are dependent. On the other hand, if the occurrence of event A does not change the probability of event B, then events A and B are independent. So now, let's begin with the rules. Rule of addition. First rule. If two events A and B are mutually exclusive, then P of A union B is equal to P of A plus P of B. Rule number 2. If events A and B are not mutually exclusive events, then P of A union B is equal to P of A plus P of B minus P of A intersection B. Example. A student goes to the library. The probability that she checks out a work of fiction is 0.40, a work of non-fiction is 0.30, and both fiction and non-fiction is 0.20. What is the probability that the student checks out a work of fiction, non-fiction, or both? Here's the solution. Let's first let F be the event that the student checks out fiction, N be the event where the student checks out non-fiction. And based on the rules of probability, P of A union B is equal to 0.40 plus 0.30 minus 0.2 is equal to 0.5. That's it. Let us move on to the next rule of probability, which is the rule of multiplication. There are two rules. First rule is when two events A and B are independent, then P of A intersection B is equal to P of A multiplied by P of B. Two outcomes are said to be dependent if knowing that one of the outcomes has occurred affects the probability that the other occurs. That is dependent. Conditional probability is when an event B in relationship to an event A is the probability that event B occurs after event A has already occurred. The probability is denoted by these symbols. The second rule is when two events are dependent. The probability of both occurring is P of A intersection B is equal to P of A multiplied by P of B given A has occurred, where P of B, where A has occurred, is equal to P of A intersection B divided by P of A, provided that P of A is not equal to 0. Example, a day's production of 850 manufactured parts contains 50 parts that do not meet customer requirements. 2 parts are selected randomly without replacement from the batch. What is the probability that the second part is defective given that the first part is defective? Here's our solution. First, let us let A be the event that the first part selected is defective, B be the event where the second part selected is defected, and we will find P of B given A has occurred. If the first part is defective, prior to selecting the second part, the batch contains 849 parts, of which 49 are defective, which is therefore 49 all over 849. That's it. Next will be the rule of subtraction. The probability that event A will occur is equal to 1 minus the probability that event A will not occur, which would be equal to 1 minus P of A prime. Example, the probability of Bill not graduating in college is 0.8. What is the probability that Bill will not graduate from college? So let us just substitute from our formula of P of A is equal to 1 minus P of A prime, which is 0.8. We will have 0.2. And that's it. Again, I am Atalia Faye C. Enriquez, and thank you for listening.